Friday. So today what we're going to do is you're going to make a copy of your notebook, and we are going to go through and highlight all the important stuff in it. So I like to do this at the beginning of each unit. So you already have from day one something to begin studying from. Now your last test, you were able to use your notebook and Google and all of that. You will be able to do that on this test as well, possibly the next test, but we are working towards locking those tests down where you do not need those resources, okay? But because I test a little differently than what you're used to in science, we're going to work our way up to that. All right, so on your assignment today, go ahead and click here to make a copy of your notebook. When you make that copy, it will be saved in your Google Drive forever and ever. And it is yours to make notes on. So when we work from our notebook from this point forward, you will get that notebook from your Google Drive, not from a link on your daily assignment for that day, okay? All right, so on screen one, you like my cute little cell baby emoji? Isn't that cute? All right. Page 2, again, is all of your vocabulary. If you click on any of those words, it takes you to the Quizlet set for that vocabulary. If you don't understand the vocab, there's no way you can understand the content. And then on the right-hand side is your proficiency scale. That tells you all the things you need to be able to do in order to do well on your final assessment for this unit. And then page 3 starts the notes. Yay, notes! So go ahead and click on slide 3 on the left-hand side. When you click on the words, notice a blue box comes up around them. And when that blue box shows up, so does all of these extra tools in the toolbar up top, including the handy-dandy highlighter tool. I don't care what color you use to highlight. You can use different colors if you want, okay? So go ahead and click on that box, on that text to make the blue box pop up. Get your highlighting tool ready. You have to highlight the information with your cursor first, and then choose the highlighter tool and choose which color in order to highlight the information. So, cell division occurs in all living things. What does occurs mean? It happens, right? Occurs means that it happens. That you see that word in test questions a lot on standardized tests, and that is one of those words that tricks people. They're not really sure what it means. Because again, you don't, your mother doesn't say to you, well, since you didn't clean your room, what is about to occur is blah, 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 blah. All right, so letter A. In multicellular organisms, multi means many, cellular means, well, cells. So in organisms made of many, many cells, cell division is responsible for growth, development, repair, and reproduction. Highlight growth, development, repair, and reproduction. Again, highlight it with the cursor. Go up to your handy dandy highlight tool. Choose the color you want to highlight it, and it will be there forever and ever. Amen. Each cell in your body was produced by one cell dividing into 2 daughter cells. The production of such a large number of body cells is accompanied by many, many repeats of cell division where one cell divides into 2 and continues dividing exponentially. Highlight that word, exponentially. Have you talked about exponents in math yet? Okay, so when you divide exponentially, that means that it happens a whole lot really, really, really fast. Uh-oh, I made it gray. I don't want it gray. I want it yellow. Yellow it is. Nope, still gray. What happened? Highlight, no gray. Highlight, yes, yellow. Thank you. All right, letter B. Growth in multicellular organisms occurs because cells are multiplying through mitosis. Highlight growth. skip those words in the commas and highlight occurs because cells are multiplying through mitosis, not because cells are increasing in size. Okay, I am not as large as I am because my cells are super big. I'm as large as I am because I have lots and lots of extra cells, mostly of the fat variety. So smaller organisms have fewer cells, large organisms not have more cells. Letter C, your body repairs injuries by means of cell division. Highlight that. Your body repairs injuries by means of cell division. And it gives some examples there. Those examples will probably be on your test. Right side. The cell cycle is called mitosis. The cell cycle includes interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis. I lied. The cell cycle is not called mitosis. Mitosis is part of the cell cycle. So under letter A, highlight. The cell cycle includes interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis. Those are the 3 phases of the cell cycle. How many phases of the cell cycle? 3 magical phases of the cell cycle. Okay? Interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis. Now, interphase is just the normal cell activities. It's just the cells hanging out doing what cells do. So highlight interphase, normal cell activity. Now, mitosis is pretty cool because it has some phases of its own. Mitosis is the process of nuclear division, so highlight that. Mitosis, nuclear division. Now, if you go up in the left-hand corner and click on the shapes, the little circle and square, and go down to arrows, pick you a handy-dandy arrow there, preferably pointing in one direction, and preferably pointing to the left, not the right. And then you're going to draw an arrow and you're going to point at the A, B, C, and D, where it says prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Sometimes in my brain, instead of telophase, I say telophase so that I remember how it's spelled. Put your big fat arrow there because you need to know those 4 phases. You need to know them well, and you need to know them in order. I will give you a hint. I remember the order by PMAT because, you know, puppies need a PMAT to pee on. So the phases of mitosis are in the order of that PMAT: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. You need to know those phases, and you need to know them in order. Number 3, cytokinesis. What other thing have we talked about that cyto sounds like? Cytoplasm, exactly. So cytokinesis is the process of division of the cytoplasm. So mitosis divides the nucleus and the genetic material in the nucleus. And then cytokinesis divides the cytoplasm and the rest of the parts of the cell. Okay, so cytokinesis is the splitting of the entire cell. Highlight that. Cytokinesis is the splitting of the entire cell. And then letter B down below, after the cell cycle, there are 2 genetically identical cells. And you may want to make the words genetically identical a different color, or put them in bold print, or maybe a different font. You want those words to stand out. Genetically identical. That is very important. So in mitosis, you have one cell that turns into 2 cells that were exactly like the first one. This is why you cannot get away with murder, because one piece of your hair is going to have the same DNA that everything else in your body has, or a little bit of skin under your fingernails, or maybe a piece of your fingernail falls off in a struggle, maybe a little drop of blood. All of those things are going to have the same exact DNA as every other cell in your body because of the process of mitosis. So click on the next slide. We are on slide number 4. So first you got to know about DNA. Remember, DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is the genetic material found in your body. DNA comes in different shapes and sizes. Actually, not really. It comes in different forms. Okay? So if you notice under letter A, 1, 2, and 3, these are all different forms of DNA. So number 1, chromatin is DNA unwound in the nucleus. It looks like spaghetti. Chromatin looks like spaghetti, and if you look down here at the picture in the nucleus, you can see an example of that. Just looks like a bunch of spaghetti piled up there. Number 2, chromosomes. Highlight the chromatin. Chromatin is DNA unwound in the nucleus, if you did not already highlight that. And actually, we're going to highlight number 2 and number 3 if you want to do it all at once. That's perfectly fine. If you want to highlight it different colors, that's okay too. Number 2, chromosomes are condensed chromatin. Notice how they look kind of like a wilty X. So they look a little bit about like an X, but the bottoms are just kind of wilty and hanging down. Or like a hair bow, you know, when you take a ribbon and tie it in your hair and then it just kind of droops. Very much what a chromosome looks like. And then number 3, you have chromatid. So those chromosomes make an exact copy of themselves, and the chromatid is half of a duplicated chromosome. Okay, so the chromosome has made a copy of itself. One of those copies is a chromatid. Right side, letter B, what happens during each phase? This is very, very important. You need to recognize this both in words and in pictures, and we'll take a look at the pictures in a little bit. Interphase. Highlight the cell spends most of its time. Highlight interphase and highlight in that first sentence, the cell spends most of its time. Interphase is basically the cell's life just hanging out doing cell stuff. Although, take a look at letter B and highlight DNA is copied. During interphase, the DNA does make a copy of itself. And then we start our PMAT process, starting with the letter P, prophase. Prophase is the first step of mitosis. Highlight prophase. Highlight letter A. The chromatin turns into chromosomes. Remember, the chromosomes look like your hair ribbon tied in a nice pretty bow and kind of hanging down and drooping, or like a wilty X. So what happens is, do you know somebody who crochets? Raise your hand if you know someone who crochets. So they take this big pile of yarn, and then they're able to make that yarn into a nice, neat pattern, right? Same thing with your DNA. It goes from the spaghetti pile of yarn of chromatin into a nice, neat pattern of chromosomes. And it does that during prophase. Also, the spindle fibers form. Remember when we talked about cytoplasm and how it's more like spider webs? Pew, 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 pew. Okay, spidey spider webs all over the cell. That's what these spindle fibers are. So those spindle fibers form from pieces of that cytoplasm, and then they shoot out to the chromosomes, just like Spider-Man does. Pew, pew. And then he sucks those chromosomes back to other sides. Okay? We'll get there in a minute. So it's important to know in prophase the spindle fibers form. The centrioles move to opposite sides of the cell, and the nuclear membrane disappears. Highlight nuclear membrane disappears. That is the biggest visual symbol, that the chromatin turns into chromosomes and the nuclear membrane disappears when you're looking at a picture. Those are the two real easy things to pick out. Metaphase. After the word metaphase, type middle. Meta means middle. Meta means middle. So metaphase. The nucleus has completely disappeared from the cell. Highlight letter B. The chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. That is the biggest visual cue for metaphase. The chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. And then number 4, anaphase. After the word anaphase, write separate. Ana means to separate. I don't know how to spell separate, or I would tell you. I always put too many E's or too many A's or something like that. I get my E's and my A's mixed up in that word. But ana means to separate. So what happens is after the spidey spindle fibers, pew, pew, come out and attach to the chromosomes and they all line up in the middle of the cell, then those spidey webs start pulling the chromosomes to opposite ends of the cell. Next slide, please. That is the end of mitosis. And then we go to, telophase is the end of mitosis. And in telophase, the nuclear membrane reforms around each group of chromosomes. So highlight telophase, also known as telophase. And then highlight nuclear membrane forms around each group of chromosomes. So what happens in telophase is that new nuclear membrane forms around the new chromosomes, and now you have a double yolker. How many of you have had a double yolker? You know, you get an egg, it's got 2 yolks in it. That's what you have at the end of telophase. Okay, you have one cell membrane, but inside you have 2 nuclei. Each of those nuclei are identical with identical copies of DNA in them. And now mitosis is over and you have cytokinesis. This is the last step in the process of cellular division. What does cyto mean? Cytoplasm. And kinesis means to split or to divide. So what happens now is you are going to divide the cytoplasm. Well, obviously you aren't, but this is what's happening in your cells. The cytoplasm begins to divide and pinch in the middle until you have 2 separate cells, one with each of the newly formed nuclei in the middle of it. So in cytokinesis, you need to highlight letter B, cytoplasm divides, and letter C, one cell becomes 2 identical cells. After you highlight that, grab you another one of those handy dandy arrows from the shape tool. This one would be good pointing up. And you're going to put an arrow pointing up to this wonderful diagram here. Make it a pretty color by filling it in so it brings nice attention to it. You need to know these pictures and you need to be able to match these pictures with the correct phases. So that diagram at the bottom, you need to study well. You need to know it well. On the right side, we have final product. So now that mitosis is over, it's important to note that at the end of the cell cycle, there are 2 identical somatic cells. Highlight that. That is that first full sentence about halfway through. There are 2 identical somatic cells. Somatic means any cell except for reproductive cells. So almost every cell in your body is a somatic cell. Okay? That just means normal cells. Somatic cells just mean your normal, everyday types of cells. Under number 1, it is important to know that each of those cells has the same DNA. Highlight same DNA. I do not like to read. I don't understand people who say they read for enjoyment or read for pleasure. That does not make sense to me. Reading is work and reading is hard. So I try to cut out all the extra words that are not necessary when I'm studying. So all you need to know there is same DNA. Number 2, the cells are diploid. Highlight diploid. And highlight meaning they have 2 versions of each chromosome. So there are 23 pairs of chromosomes, which means there are 46 total chromosomes. And then under number 3, now each cell can go through the cell cycle all by itself all over again. We're not going to highlight anything there. Notice at the bottom of that page, you have several videos and an assignment that we will do later on. Please do not work ahead on these assignments because you do not have all the information to be very successful at those assignments. All right, next page. Now that we have finished mitosis, we are going to talk about meiosis. Now remember a couple of days ago, we talked about those words that make your parents blush because they don't think they're sweet babies. Should be learning about things that say sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. But we covered the fact that all that means is for something to reproduce sexually, it needs DNA from 2 different organisms in order to do so. For something to reproduce asexually, it just needs DNA from 1 organism. So meiosis is the process of cellular division that makes those special reproductive cells. So in animals, those reproductive cells include egg cells and sperm cells. In plants, it's often pollen cells and seed cells. So there are several different types of cells we are talking about here. Okay, the key is because you're going to have that pollen cell join that seed cell in order to make a new beautiful flower, there are only half the required number of chromosomes in each cell. So when they join together, that organism has the correct number of chromosomes because you are defined by your number of chromosomes. You are not a horse because a horse has different numbers of chromosomes than humans. Sadly, you are not a beautiful German Shepherd dog because they have a different number of chromosomes than you do, okay? So, it is important that during that reproductive process, we don't double the number of chromosomes because then you're going to be something completely different. We don't want that to happen. That kind of defeats the purpose of reproduction, right? So, meiosis goes through the process of mitosis, but it goes through it twice. So the second time around, it divides that number of chromosomes so that each of the cells have half the number of chromosomes than the original cell. So let's start right here at the top of slide number 6, letter A. Now, the correct pronunciation of this word is meiosis. However, I talk fast sometimes, and so I will most of the time pronounce this word meiosis just so there is a very distinct difference between meiosis and mitosis, okay? And it helps those of you who are visual learners know that meiosis is the one with the E and the I. Mitosis is the one with the T, okay? So when you're looking at it in print, you can tell the difference between the two. So meiosis is a type of cellular division that is necessary for sexual reproduction. Highlight, necessary for sexual reproduction. Remember, that does not mean these cells are flirting with each other and buying each other flowers and going out on hot dates and all that stuff. Okay, number 1, gametes. Highlight gametes and reproductive cells. You need to know that the term gamete means a reproductive cell. So the purpose of meiosis is to create gametes, create those cells that are specific. Their specific purpose is reproduction. Letter B, stages of meiosis. are very similar to mitosis, except there are 2 divisions resulting in 4 cells. Highlight. There are 2 divisions resulting in 4 cells. Now, letter C, interphase. Highlight interphase, normal cell activity. Interphase is the same in mitosis and meiosis. Same process. The cells are hanging out doing cell things. Meiosis 1. After meiosis 1, type same as mitosis. Type in same as mitosis. Meiosis 1 is the exact same thing as mitosis. It happens the same way, the same steps, the same things happen in each step, and you end up with 2 cells that were identical to the first cell. So we are going to skip over all of those steps that tell you the exact thing that we just talked about, except all the way at the bottom in letter E, cytokinesis. The cytoplasm separates, creating 2 cells. Highlight that. So at the end of meiosis 1, you have the same thing you have at the end of mitosis. Same exact process, same exact results. However, we're not finished yet. So look on the right-hand side, meiosis 2. Again, the steps are exactly the same. The exact same thing happens in each step, except it's happening with 2 cells at a time. And this time the DNA does not make a copy of itself. So instead of having an exact copy of the DNA on both sides, you have half the DNA on this side, half the DNA on that side. And that's how you end up with the haploid cells. So if you look on down to letter D, halfway down on the right-hand side, after meiosis, highlight. There are 4 haploid cells. Haploid means it only has half of the number of chromosomes that are in a somatic cell or a normal everyday cell. And then right under that number 1, each cell has different combinations of DNA. This is why you don't look just like your brother or sister, because each of these cells now have different copies of that DNA. Different forms of chromosomes. So one of them might have chromosomes that make you have blue eyes. One of them might have chromosomes that make you have green eyes. And then the paragraph below sums it up. Let me see if I can move my picture around here so we can see it. The cells have half of the number of chromosomes for the species. This allows 2 gametes to come together and give the embryo the correct number of cells. So I want you to start highlighting at, let's just highlight from the beginning. The cells have half of the number of chromosomes for the species. This allows 2 gametes to come together and give the embryo the correct number of, it says the correct number of cells. It should be chromosomes. Let me fix that. Y'all change that word cells at the end of that sentence to chromosomes. That's a typo. So the embryo will have the correct number of chromosomes. Now on slide 7. Notice there are several videos, another assignment we'll do, and a diagram of the process of meiosis. Notice on the second part of meiosis, meiosis 2, you have 2 cells going through the exact same process at the exact same time, and you end up with 4 completely different cells at the end. Mitosis, you end up with 2 cells. Meiosis, you end up with 4 cells. Very important to remember.